Everybody, welcome back to another session of Addiction and the Three Principles. Today we brought back Dr. Bill Pettit due to popular demand. We're going to be talking about mainly psychological innocence today, which I think is probably one of the most vital things to understand for recovery, because that's what means we are not broken. There's nothing wrong with us. We're not bad people. We're not screw-ups. It's just literally we're doing the best we can with the thinking that we have going on in our heads. And it's really that simple. And I love the way that Bill talks about this, because this is one of the things that really changed my view on recovery when I first came across the principles. And it just made everything so much lighter. It wasn't so serious. It was like, oh, that's it. Okay, that's okay, cool. It really simplified everything and made it so much easier. And I love that about the way you talk about really the principles in general, Bill, but especially around mental health and addiction and stuff like that, because I don't think there's enough people out there talking about hope with those things. I think there's a lot of people talking about, sickness and disease and things that sound very bad. So it's wonderful to have that message of hope being spread. And I think Harry said he has something he'd like to say real quick, and we'll get you started, Bill. Actually, first, real quick, Harry, sorry. I do have everybody muted. It's just to keep down on background noise. So if you have any questions or comments or anything at any point, just please feel free to either unmute yourself, or in the participants tab, you can click on the raise hand feature, and we'll call on you and get you in. We want this to be more of a conversation. It's not, Bill's not really here to just lecture us.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
All right, Harry,
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
First, Bill, I'm not right this moment, but Tony Smith from London has texted me a question. So when there's a lull in the conversation, I have a question that's waiting to be asked to you on this talk here today.
Yeah. What I really like, go ahead, Harry. I didn't mean to
go ahead. No, please go ahead.
No, what I really like is to take, even if we take 2 or 3 minutes here at the beginning, if people out there have questions that they're, given the topic that we have on psychological innocence, if they have questions that they have in their mind that they'd like to share right now, it's not that I'll answer them directly, but I then will have them on the back burner of my mind as I do my presentation, and we have this dialogue. Like Greg said, I want it to be a dialogue and not a lecture or podcast. So can we take Tony's question now? And if there are any other people, so I can put it down?
Let's start with Tony's, and then we'll open it up for anybody else. So get your questions together.
And then I have a little example I want to use as well.
Okay.
This is Tony Smith from London.
Okay.
He said he's sorry he can't make it. He was planning to make it for this talk, but he couldn't make it.
Okay.
While we experience thought because we are always thinking, it seems to me that people are dramatically affected by alcohol and other drugs. Isn't our thinking affected by this? Example, I know some people who are very nice, but when drunk, they become quite nasty.
Okay.
So there's our first question.
Okay. Anybody else have?
And the bottom left corner of your screen is a little microphone symbol. If you touch that, it'll unmute you. Or like I said, you can go into the participants tab and there's a raise hand button. So we'll just give it a minute here, see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, if not, I'll be glad to kind of start on psychological innocence. Huh?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, but I will. If we get to where I haven't answered that, because it's, I'm going to answer it in a short way right now. the reason people use drugs and alcohol is to change their thinking. I mean, you know, they've gotten themselves in trouble. They're coming to repossess the furniture, and the guy opens a bottle of Jim Beam, and about halfway through, is he worried about them coming to take the furniture? Hell no. So we'll talk about it more. But of course, now what we know, or what we'll talk about, is the more we know the principles, it changes our relationship with our thinking. It changes our relationship with what our computer brain spits out. You know, and I guess we could talk about that even now. But you know, the vital thing is, and I had somebody the other day that contacted me after the session, and you know, I'm just surprised, as you are, Harry, that so often I've had people that have read so many of the 105 books that are available now internationally on the three principles, and they barely looked at Mr. Banks's books.
I hate that. I hate that.
Well, I try not to hate anything, but
oh, well, you're not.
but I know what you mean. It just seems silly. It seems like you know, that's where you would
start. Yeah.
That's where you would start. You know, just like if you were learning relativity, you would start with Einstein's 1905 papers. You know, you saying you hate that, Harry. I'm not picking on you. When I was at West Virginia University, a good friend of Judy Sedgman's taught this course on aging gracefully. And so she brought into the class a 99-year-old lady who lived independently. In fact, was taking care, had her 24-year-old son grandson who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. She had so much love in her heart. She was healing. She had him living with her and caring for him, and she's 99. And so one of the students asked her, he said, what is your key? What's the key, do you think, to you being 99 years old? And she got real quiet, and she said, well, you know, I guess it's because I've never hated anything ever in my life. I think hatred is a heavy burden to bear. I think of you know, Martin Luther King saying, I've chosen love because the burden of hatred is much too heavy, right? But those of you that don't know West Virginia and Pittsburgh, the rivalry between those two schools, they've stopped playing each other in football now because they're not in the same conference, but they used to call it the backyard brawl. And so this lady, this 99-year-old lady, said, I never hated anything in my entire life. And then she got real quiet, and she said, well, that's not really true. From 1927 to 1931, when I went to WVU, I hated Pitt. She kind of confessed that for 4 years she allowed herself to hate. But she let it go. A lot of people never let it go after they graduated from school, right? But you know, this little statement on page 32 of The Missing Link. Some believe the brain and the mind are the same, but there has to be a power behind the brain to make it function. The brain and the mind are two entirely different things. The brain is biological. The mind is spiritual. The brain acts like a computer. What you put in is all you get out. It's simple logic. So we are thinking beings, as Tony said. We're going to be thinking our whole life. The degree of spiritual understanding that we have is going to determine what relationship we have with the thoughts that we have. Because our brain, now we can think thoughts, use this power of thought we've been given. I can think right now of a church steeple or a pony or a dog, or we could all think about certain things. But guess what? If all of us thought about something, nobody would have the same exact image in their head. So we're all using our thinking individually. Now, our brain is like a computer. It just has limited information. If I'm born and raised in Somalia, or I'm born and raised in Angola, and like a friend of mine from medical school, his son is a missionary in Angola, and they went and spent 2 weeks with him out in the bush, where they had no electricity, no running water, no, the senior elder, to celebrate the father being there, Dr. Hoyme, they killed a goat. He slit the elder got to slit his throat and do the whole, and I said, I'm sure you had a lot of A1 sauce and Heinz 57 to go with it. He said, yeah, right. But what I'm saying is, wherever we're raised and whatever environment we're raised in, we have a starter kit in there in our thought system. And those thoughts, periodically, as we go through life, they get triggered and they come into our consciousness. But if you understand that we're spiritual energy, we're divine energy, and mind is that connection, that manifestation of that divine energy, and mind is in charge, not the brain, it becomes less and less important what thoughts you have. Because you have the freedom of will to thank your brain for sharing its comments. And if there's anything useful in what it's shared, then you utilize it. But if not, you allow your mind to quiet, and you listen for wisdom, and you get present in your life, and you go forward and do the best you can until you see with more clarity. So interesting. Psychological innocence, again, spoken separate from the principles, from understanding these three spiritual principles of universal mind, universal thought, universal consciousness. Psychological innocence seems like just a good idea, or it maybe seem to some people like a bad idea. I think, Greg, you gave a nice definition of it. To me, psychological innocence just means every one of us, including everyone on this talk, none of us are the exception. We've all, you talked about that we're not screw-ups, and that we're not screw-ups, and that's not our essence. Have we all screwed up? Well, at least I'll raise my hand, and more than the 10 times that my fingers and toes will do. So because I've screwed up doesn't make me a screw-up. It makes me a human being who is screwed up, who has, given the limited level of understanding that I've gone as I've stumbled my way through life, I've made mistakes. I've tried to learn from them, and I've tried to make amends and go forward. But I see that every step of the way, given my level of understanding that I brought to the situation, I did the very best that I saw to do at that moment, that I saw that I was able to do. Now, that seems like a cop-out for people. So let me tell a couple of stories. One of them actually was from this morning. Last night, I actually, I'm not sure, I didn't have anything that I knew on my mind. I might have had an extra cup of coffee yesterday, but I woke up after about 5 hours, got to bed early, but woke up about 3:30 or 3. And I did some work that I'm trying to update my CV. And so I slept in this morning. My wife got up early at 6:30, and I got up at about 9:30. And we were sitting talking, and she was reading the book, a journal that comes from, or a publication that comes, I don't know whether it comes quarterly or so, from Siena Heights University, which is a small Catholic university in Michigan, where she got her master's degree before she got her doctorate degree from WVU. And it's where she was dean of the graduate school until shortly 18 months before we left. And so she knew this young man, and she said, I never knew that. He came through as an intern, and it had his story in the book. He's now getting his doctorate degree in juvenile justice, in criminal justice. But it tells the story that when he was young, he was his mother was really struggling and had multiple men coming through, and many of them had been in and out of prison. And at 5 years old, he learned how to pick locks. He was taught how to pick locks at 5 years of age. And then when he got to be young, he got into drugs and selling drugs, made money rather than work for minimum wage. And he got into a situation where he was in a car with a young woman. He had drugs there, and he had gotten to carrying a gun from, I think, 15 or 16 years of age. And a patrolman came to the door, and he knew he was in deep doo-doo. And in that moment, he pointed the gun at the patrolman and shot at him and wounded him, and to where he was disabled. And the other patrolman shot 15 times into the vehicle with one of these powerful guns that goes through everything. And and he took off somehow. The girl wasn't killed. They were on a chase into Canada from Montana, back in the woods for a day. They ran into the woods, and they finally got caught. And he was sentenced to 19 years in prison. And he spent 10 years in prison. And he must have, I was curious, Harry, because I'm sure there was a time, one day, when he had that one thought that Sid talks about, where he saw something that changed everything, because he became a changed human being. He had an insight from within. And from that minute forward, he was it wasn't that he was different. He just realized more who he was, his true spiritual nature, and his whole life and who he is and the way he is just incredible. Okay. The other story that many of you might have heard me tell on psychological innocence, and I think each of us can look back, because I'll tell you the price if we don't see spiritual innocence 100% of the time is resentment towards those that we feel have hurt us, and guilt. We will pay a burden of incredible burden as we go through life. And it's not wrong, or it's just like, if you didn't know you had a 200-pound weight on your back, life would seem really, really hard until you realized you didn't have to carry it. And you didn't even know it was there. It's just that life was hard and you had trouble even getting up in the morning. And that was an interview with, I think it was Diane Sawyer, of a young man on television who had, when he was 16 years old, taken a gun to school. He got so angry at his principal that at some point during the day, he walked down the hall to the principal's office and put 5 bullets in his chest. He killed the principal, who was a husband, a father, a grandfather, a friend, a brother to many people. He killed the man. And he was tried as an adult, even though he was 2 months shy of his 16th birthday, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. I think last year there was a Supreme Court thing where they're going to have to review all of those teenagers that were put in life without parole, without any hope of parole, before they were the age of 18. And they're going to have to be reviewed one by one. But here's where the principles come in. We talk about that we are this divine energy, that same energy that has these hummingbirds come back every year to the same place, that has the whales go down and all have their babies from the Northwest and have their babies in Hawaii and come back, and then every year they all have a different song than they had last year, but they all have the same song. There's things in nature that this divine energy or universal mind is screaming at us or sometimes not screaming, but just trying to say, will you see what's happening in this world? There's a universal mind that we're connected to. So, and we talk about wisdom. We talk about wisdom like it's a separate entity, but all it is a manifestation in our lives of that intelligent energy of the universe that we're made of, that to the degree that we get present in our lives, we clear the radio signals so we can hear from the source. And those are the times in our lives where just about every parent that I've ever seen has had the experience with their child, even if they've been reactive with their children 95% of the time. They remember those 5% of the time that they were not reactive, that they were responsive to the child. And even as they did or said whatever it was that they did in that moment, they had the experience of, wait a minute, how did I know to do this? How did I know to say that? It was as if it was coming through me, not something I was thinking up. Have we not all had that experience in our life? And it could be as a mechanic, it could be as a plumber. So Diane Sawyer asked the young man, she said, what do you think? He now is in his early 20s, he'd been in prison for 4 or 5 years, and said, what do you think of every night when you go to bed? And he said, well, it may be a little different than you think. And she said, what do you mean? He said, well, I do think every night about walking down that hall with my grandfather's pistol in my revolver in my pocket. But what I remember and I remember all the angry thoughts that I was thinking to justify what I was going to do. But what I remember is there was another set of thoughts that kept intruding into my mind. And those were thoughts like, Joey, this is not a good idea.
Mm.
Joey, you don't have to do this. Joey, this is not going to work out well for you. Joey, there's the side door. Why don't you run out it right now, run home, and go take a nap? All they'll do tomorrow is get you for leaving school early. But he said, you know what? I ignored those thoughts and went back to my own personal angry thoughts and did what I did, and I paid the price now for the rest of my life.
You bring up a good point, Bill. Whenever, is that me? Whenever we have distress or confusion in our minds, extreme confusion, we don't know which thoughts to listen to and which thoughts not to listen to. And we're even surprised that we have good thoughts in there because there's so many thoughts in that busy accumulation. So how does one know what do you use, or what do you suggest? Because we are having a lot of thoughts in there when we are in a lower level of consciousness, or we're confused by what life has brought us, like a divorce or a heavy drinking session. How does one see the clarity to be free from that?
That's a good question, Harry. I'm reminded of a quote by Viktor Frankl. I think most people know who Viktor Frankl was, but if not, I just recently, at 75 years of age, read his book. Viktor Frankl was a Vienna psychiatrist, and in Germany, and he was about 35 years old. He was born in 1905. He died in 1997. He lived to be 92. At the age of 35, he was placed in the death camps as a Jew, and put in the death camps where 1 out of 28 came out of there alive. His wife who was pregnant, of course, died, as did his parents and everybody else. And he should, by all these things about trauma, have had severe post-traumatic stress disorder and lived a very short life afterwards. And yet he lived to be 92. And he mentions in his book, The Man's Search for Meaning, he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that's where our freedom lies. So between that thing that's happened in our life, whether it's immediately right now, or whether it's, like you say, a divorce or loss of a job or sudden death of a loved one, there is a space. And that's where our freedom lies. Now, I think what the understanding our spiritual nature and understanding these three gifts and powers that we've been given of mind, thought, and consciousness allows us to utilize that space of freedom. Because without that understanding, that space of freedom is just a space, it always exists. It existed for the young man walking down the hall. And if he would have gone through Krista Campsell's course in middle school, or Brooke, I can't say her name, in Tampa, or the people in Denmark that are working in the schools, then it would have been a no-brainer, Harry. He would have said, wow, I think I know where these thoughts are coming from. But even if he was confused, he would have known enough that when you're confused, leave your thinking alone and do as little as you can and get as quiet as you can. If you have to, that's why people have known through the ages, I think I'll take a nap. I think Mavis Karn tells this great story of driving through North Dakota with her 4-year-old granddaughter. Mavis Karn, many of you know, I've known her for 35 years, and she's a wonderful teacher of the principles. Taught in the juvenile in Red Wing down in where juvenile offenders that had killed people in robberies and stuff in Minnesota. But as they're driving along, the granddaughter, a couple of things. One, Mavis said she'd got into her thinking a little bit, and all she sees is this space, and she's having judgmental thoughts of, my gosh, you'd think they could have planted a tree every half mile. Would it have been too much to plant a tree? And her little 4-year-old granddaughter looks up and said, oh, Grammy, this is so beautiful. There is so much space. They're looking at the same thing, and this 4-year-old became a teacher. Then the little girl had some on the radio said something about war. And she said, Grammy, what's war? And she said, well, it's kind of when people get really upset at each other as a whole group of people so much that it makes sense to them to actually try to hurt and kill each other. And the little girl shook her head and she said, Grammy, why don't they just take a nap? Through the ages, people have known when they were confused or lost to go to sleep on it, to take a nap, to not. Harry Truman used to say he wrote a lot of letters that he left on his desk, and then the next morning he threw in the wastebasket because he knew that what he wrote. Now that's one of the dangers we have now with emails and tweets and all this stuff, is that there's not that space. Now, if he would have had a deeper level of understanding, he wouldn't have even taken all the time it wrote to write a two-hour letter, right? But so let me finish on the young man. He said, I didn't know to listen to those thoughts. He said, and so when I think about every night is number one, where were those thoughts coming from? And why didn't I have the wisdom to listen to them? And you make a good point, Harry, that what happens if we don't have the understanding that we listen, that we have enough wherewithal to listen to our instrument panel. The time that I spoke before, I'd like to share one more metaphor and then take questions. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Have I talked about listening to the instrument panel when I was a flight surgeon and the pilots landing on the aircraft carriers? Have I talked about that?
No, you haven't. Can I just say one thing
Sure.
before we get into that, Bill? Like
Sure.
one of the things you're alluding to is this quiet space that people have. And it's the first thing I noticed in this room when we started this room was there's so much more hope and understanding than there is out there in the communities where there isn't the three principles, because they simply don't understand that. And sometimes I'm actually a little confused because I see people have this very in-depth understanding. I know they've had a big experience, but they doubt about the quiet and the silence that you're. Every time in the room, you could feel the hope and optimism. Where when I work in the recovery centers and so on, it's like that has to be introduced as an idea that is going to save their soul or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that is beautiful. And when you do talk to people who've heard the three principles, the potential for insight is so powerful. You know, it's like that's what they're looking for as well.
Right. Well, you're right, Harry, that when we have a stimulus, when we have something happen, we have two places to listen. One is our reaction, with our automatic reaction. And if that leads us to any sort of if we lose our mental well-being, if we lose our well-being, if we lose our balance, that, to me, that's a really good sign not to engage our thinking at that time, because that's our choice. Our choice is to go to quiet as best as we can, leave our thinking alone, or to engage our thinking to try to find the answer. And I have found that when things happen that knock me off my balance, I don't know that going to my analytical thinking has ever solved it. If it did, then it solves it very quickly. But if it doesn't solve it in the first 60, 90 seconds, it's not going to solve it in the next 60 years. And so I'll tell this story quickly because it's been impactful for a lot of people that have told me. When I was a Navy flight surgeon in training. Oh, you had something, Harry? Go ahead.
Yeah, Greg someone has to leave and has a question.
Yeah, Beth has had her hand up for a little bit,
Yeah,
and she.
And if it's okay if we don't have to tell this, go ahead.
All right, Beth, you are unmuted. Go for it.
No, she's still muted.
Oh.
Yeah.
There we go.
No.
Okay, Beth, you're unmuted. Hello, Beth.
Talk about silence. Yeah.
There you go.
Well, and look, maybe we'll move past her then.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and tell your story, Bill.
Well, I see Beth here, and she doesn't look like she's not muted. Beth, do you want to share what it is, or are you able to? Your question? Hello?
Or she's got trouble with her technology.
Oh, you're having trouble with your, maybe you can type, can she type it to you, Greg?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, go ahead and type it, Beth, and we'll get it on.
Okay. Okay, I see Patty has a question. Maybe we'll just go to questions now. I've talked enough. Yeah. Did you have a question,
Here,
Patty?
please.
Oh, okay.
I did.
It's not working, Beth. Just type it out.
I see a lot of old friends here and some new ones.
Just to let you know, Bill, Antoinette is the first Native person we've had on the show. So,
Oh, wonderful. Hi, Antoinette.
yeah.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's very interesting to be learning with you guys today.
Chat.
I'm
with you, Greg, or Harry, how you want to.
She's going out. Okay, Beth, let's see, she says, it seems we're just talking about soul and consciousness. So I guess it's more of a statement than a question. It just seems like we're teaching about our true nature, soul, and the space between stimulus and response. So I would have to agree with that. I mean, that's the three principles are nothing new. They've been around forever. This is just a new way of talking about them. There's been, many thousands of ways of talking about them, to me.
Yeah, I don't. I don't know if I can make the connection between that space between stimulus and response, but it is where it is an opportunity for us to access pure consciousness. There's no doubt about it. And that's what Sid said, that the soul is just pure consciousness. That's why when he says your thoughts and feelings are a mirror of your soul, it's a powerful statement. Your thoughts and feelings are a mirror of your soul. And for a long time, when people would ask me, what does that mean? I'd say, I'm not really sure. It resonates. I feel like there's truth there. But I don't know that I know exactly what it means. And I don't claim to know exactly what he was saying, but I will tell you what's come to me that's been useful, and I certainly welcome Harry, anybody. That statement, it's your thoughts and feelings are a mirror of your soul. If soul is pure consciousness, I think of fresh water, fresh mountain water coming down, cascading out of the mountains, out of the Rockies. This fresh, incredibly fresh, clear water. And then it goes into a river, and some companies start dumping chemicals into it and contaminating it. Or people start putting garbage in the river. And the river is no longer that fresh, pure consciousness. That we innocently, and this is where the psychological innocence comes in, we've innocently utilized these gifts and powers of mind, thought, and consciousness in a way that I think most of us, as he says, we live from the time we're born, we're living in the duality of thought. And to the degree we understand, we will be less at the mercy of it. But we've innocently thrown garbage and chemicals into our consciousness and contaminated it. And we haven't known clearly that there's an automatic clearing system in consciousness that clears the contamination. But you can't do it by trying to think your way there with your analytical thinking. Can't. It's automatic. It'll occur. It's the same healing energy that will clear the water back to its purified state. It's the same healing energy that heals a broken bone when the doctor does nothing but put a splint on it and tell you to not walk on it. That same healing energy has the power to heal our soul within seconds, if not sooner, at any time in our life. That's, you know, though, how many you can, if you raise your hands, those of you that are, I'm seeing about 10 or 12 people, how many of you are aware of some of the research with ketamine and resistant depression? Anybody? Any hands? No. Okay. Well, I'm not going to bore you with a lot of science, but I'm going to make the point. There's a drug called ketamine. It's actually a horse tranquilizer, and it's used as an anesthetic, and it's even been used as an abuse agent. People, they call it vitamin K. And it's a dissociative. It dissociates people from their thinking. Have you heard that the FDA recently approved Ecstasy for a treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder? They're dissociatives. It's the best people know, and it's important that we have compassion, that we have gratitude, like Sid said, that we've been allowed to see a glimpse of something, that we've jumped the boundaries of time, but to have compassion for those that haven't been as fortunate as we have, and to try to have a conversation with compassion and with love rather than judgment. But what they found is if you give IV ketamine slowly, and I forget the exact dose, like 40 milligrams per kilogram IV over 6 to 8 minutes, slowly, you can have people who have failed a number of drugs, tests, treatments for depression. They've had electroconvulsive therapy. They've had vagus nerve stimulation. They've had deep electrical stimulation of their brain. They've had vagus nerve implantation, which costs $20,000. And when they give this IV ketamine, up to 70% of people who have failed all treatments for depression, 70% of them completely resolve their depression within 2 to 6 hours. Now, if you don't understand the principles, you get really excited that this ketamine is an incredible drug. And all it's doing is completely dissociating people from their analytical thinking. And what does that make space for? It makes a space for the universal mind that's trying to come through at all times to fill that person up. And literally, the hundreds of thousands of new cells that are in the hypothalamus and in the brain, in that 2 to 6 hours, they're measuring incredible, what we call neuroplasticity, neurogenesis. Cells, hundreds of thousands of them, are being created in the brain in 2 to 6 hours. And all of that saying is that it's inside of us. Everything we need is inside of us. If we can even get a glimpse to get out of the way of it. If we can even have a little bit of courage to leave our thinking alone, as best as we can. As best as we can. But notice, for the 3,000th time, I'm going to say, not to do what I did for 41 years, not to fight the negative thoughts like hell, not to try to distract yourself from them, not to try to think positive thoughts, but to the best you can, leave them the hell alone. That's all. It's got to, no, our intellect says, no, it's got to be more complicated than this. They used to say that to Sid, didn't they, Harry? And he said, well, I could pretend like it was more complicated, but it's not. You are what you're looking for, and it's accessible at all times. And it's important, going back to psychological innocence, that we don't beat the hell out of ourselves for the times we didn't know to do that, but to be grateful for the times that we've seen to do it. And the more we have gratitude, Sid always said, gratitude is a feeling that will always carry you to see more than you've seen today. Gratitude will always carry you like wings. It gives you wings to go forward. And direction is the key. It's better to be going, I talked to a lady in Alaska yesterday. If I wanted to go up to Alaska to visit her or other people, it'd be better for me to be going 5 miles an hour north than 85 miles an hour south. Because direction is the key. Direction is the key. And to be gentle with ourselves and to know that even those people that have done things that we experienced as hurtful, they were lost as we've been lost. Nobody hurts people except hurting people. Again, to me, that's just the way it is. If anybody on this call ever hurt somebody when you were totally at peace, full of a lighthearted, loving, joyful feeling, we need to write it up because we'll win a Nobel Prize. It'll be the only time it ever happened. But I'm betting that it hasn't. And I know it's like what I started to say, and I'll just say an abbreviated version. What I learned when I was on an aircraft carrier out in the ocean with 40-foot waves is the one young pilot that couldn't land his plane when he got vertigo. He experienced, as did many of the other senior pilots, that as they were coming in on a total black night with no stars and no moon, they experienced vertigo, that their body was telling them they were upside down. So that they wanted to turn the plane over to be right side up, and they would have crashed and exploded many other planes on the deck. And the one young pilot that couldn't land the plane finally had to, after 3 tries, rather than have to eject the plane into the ocean, went back 100 miles to Charleston and landed on a nice lighted airfield. But the pilots that didn't have to go back, that landed that plane, it's because they, even though their body was telling them you're upside down, they looked at their instruments and they trusted their instruments. And their instruments said they were right side up. And they were on glide path, and they could follow the lights on the ship, which told them when they were, and they ignored their whole body telling them they were upside down. Now, is that an easy thing to do? It's easy. They would say it's pretty easy if you really understand the principles of vertigo. And you really understand where to listen for truth. And for them, they knew the place of truth was on that instrument panel. That young lieutenant didn't know that. He still had more trust in his body than he did in that instrument panel. If we don't understand and trust that as soon as our feeling level goes away from a loving, lighthearted, joyful feeling, it's not the time to engage our analytical thinking to get back to the loving feeling. It's the same. We have to learn, if we want to live there more of the time, it is vital. There's no should. I don't want to make a should here because it's not good to should on ourselves. But that's supposed to be a joke, guys. But anyway, it is vital that we learn to trust our instrument panel and know that the times we haven't, and the other people too that haven't, they are psychologically innocent, just like that young man. That's why the answer is, as Sid always said, these programs around in now 4 countries that are teaching this in middle school, teaching it in high school, that more and more young people would come out of school understanding this. You talk about a cure for the murder rate and for the bullying and for the cure rate for being at the mercy of bullying, because kids that come out of that will have nothing but compassion for those that are bullying them. But the bullying won't have any power over them. They'll know that it doesn't. They really will know that old saying that we're all told as kids, that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, even if they're written on an email, or even if they're over and over. But you have to have a level of understanding for that to be true. And that's where the incredible hope that Harry talks about, that you talk about, Greg, that we all talk about. Because addictions, to me, I've said it before, it's no different from obsessive compulsive, from hoarding, from skin pain. It's an attempt to try to relieve the inner pain, the inner distress that we've innocently created by our misuse of the thoughts. And what's hereditary is that every one of us, if we got stressed enough, if we stressed ourselves out enough with our thinking, we would find whatever substance or habit or action activated our reward system the most and gave us some relief from the pain for the longest period of time, with the least amount of damage.
I think that's the definition of psychological innocence.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, Bill, this is from Pamela J. A dear friend of ours was deeply depressed, but had been very close to Sid and had strong spiritual presence inside of herself, but not at that moment. And we because we were doing this show, I started to talk to her about psychological innocence, and this is what she saw, Bill. It was priceless, and she looked outside, and because she's so clear, she sees all the garbage and the inequity, the stupidity and stuff, and she can't stop seeing that stuff. And she said, "Oh, I can see that they're psychologically innocent, and I don't have to do anything to fix it, and I can see that it's wrong, but not get upset about it."
Yep.
And I thought that was priceless. That's a gem, because
it is. Go ahead, Harry. Yeah.
Well, and I immediately thought of politics and Trump and stuff, and I could see this psychological innocence is a lot deeper, because it does provide the answer to us not being upset with what we see as truth. It's not that, Sid was not a type of person who just lived in everything is beautiful world.
No, you're right. When you learn to forgive, you see with clarity the ignorance and the innocence of those who trespass against you. You realize that anyway, and that's what you see. I think of, and maybe this is I think it's an okay example. Does anybody old enough besides me to remember Billy Carter, who was President Carter's little brother?
Yep.
And Billy had a terrible problem. He didn't know how to be at peace, and he used alcohol, and he would get drunk, and he would do incredible things that could have caused embarrassment. But what did Jimmy Carter do? He loved his brother. He saw him with psychological innocence. It doesn't mean that he didn't try to get him to help. In fact, he had him go to the Navy alcohol program that they'd started out in Long Beach, where I went to train when I was in the Navy. And I don't know if I don't know that Billy's still alive. But he saw him with compassion. And that's the way I see, that's the only way that I can see some political leaders at times. It's the only way I can look back at time as I listen to World War II on a course that I'm taking and see Stalin and see Mussolini and see Hitler. I see that given their level of understanding and what they were dealing with at the level of understanding that they were at, everything, every moment. And then I know that's hard because of the horrific things that came of that. Millions and millions of people just killed. But if you don't see it, you have a heavy burden, as you just carry a heavy burden. And it's not a should. It's not a should. We don't have to. It's like you don't have to understand gravity. But if you do, life's going to be a lot gentler with a lot less problems than if you don't. And understanding psychological innocence as a corollary of the three principles really leads to freedom from resentment and guilt and allows you to have more love and energy. And it doesn't mean that you don't do what you see to do. It doesn't mean that you become a doormat. It means that you know that with a loving, compassionate, clear heart and a clear mind, you will see more possibilities than you will with a head and heart full of anger.
Yeah, and realizing that upstream the water's always clear.
Well,
upstream from that pollution, from the contaminants.
Yeah. Inside.
But when we stop putting the contaminants in the water, it starts clearing up on its own naturally.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing is that old Chinese thing, that crisis, the Chinese symbol for crisis is two symbols put together. One is danger, and the second symbol is opportunity. And in this crisis, I think that our present administration in the United States, and there's other parts of the world too, where leaders have gotten control, where it's creating a crisis. And if we can see that as, yes, there's danger, but it's also opportunity. And we're seeing people rising to the occasion that maybe wouldn't have before. So if one by one, people start to live in a place of more understanding, that's what's going to change things, And it may not be in our lifetime, but if we can just start it, the education of these young people, and a few of us old farts too, then who knows? Who knows? Because maybe we can then share it with our grandchildren. We can maybe share it, us old farts can share it with our grandchildren and be a teachers the way we are to our children and grandchildren.
And Sid treasured his grandkids.
Oh, he did. Yes, he did.
And
he always said the answer was with the youth, didn't he, Harry?
100%. And that this generation was just introducing the three principles.
Right.
And the next generation was going to live it.
Right. When you think of that the radio was not even invented until the 1920s. We're not even 100 years from the radio being invented. We're barely over 100 years of an airplane being invented, and we've got rockets going out showing us pictures supposedly of something that happened 5 billion years ago. And we can't get along with each other and can't sustain each other.
That's a cool point. Yeah.
There's something missing. And what's coming to my mind recently, it keeps coming to me, is understanding universal principles changes everything. It always has, and it always will. But this is the one area that hasn't, at least one of the areas, that hasn't found those before Sid came along. It's not, my wife is reading Synchronicity, which I'm going to read again. She's reading a book now called Presence. There are people, Sid said it, there are people everywhere. There's truth is everywhere. It's just that he was able to see this in a package and a clarity see the principles behind it that it's the missing piece. But principles changed physics. They changed thermodynamics. They changed laws of motion. They changed when they saw circulation. People did not understand until about 300 years ago how the body's circulation worked. That it got oxygenated in the lungs, went to the heart, went out to the body, oxygen got used up, went through little capillaries, came back through the veins, got into the lungs, got oxygen back, got over to the heart, and this has happened 70 to 90 times a minute for everybody till we die. Nobody understood that. So the things they used to do, once they understood the principles, made no sense. A great percentage of them. It's been true in everything. In surgery, before they understood the principles of bacteria, they used to sharpen their scalpel on the heel, on the steel, on the bottom of their boot before they cut into the person's stomach and then wondered why they died. It was innocent. They did not know better. It's true. Psychological innocence is truth. It's truth. It's not easy for us sometimes to accept it for ourselves or others, but it's true. Beating yourself up will not make it easier for you not to use drugs or alcohol. It'll create a level of tension that you'll go to what you did before to relieve tension. Being angry at something that somebody did 20 years ago will do nothing except ruin your life today. Seeing psychological innocence is not a should, but it's vital to living in peace. Sid says, forgiveness releases you from mental anguish and pain and all the horrible negative feelings an unforgiving mind experiences. It's not a should, but it is vital to keep looking in that direction. And here's the key, folks. In my experience of almost 50 years as a physician and 34 years from teaching from the principles, if a person gets clear that they want to have see psychological innocence for themselves or others, but they say, I just can't forgive myself, or I just can't forgive that SOB. I can't. If they see that it's in even their best interest to do that, and they really want it because they want to have a heart full of love and lightheartedness rather than one of pain and stress, if they see that clearly, I tell people, if you get clear that that's what you want, you will make space for that to come through you. And it is in the cards for you to wake up some morning with a smile on your face and you've gotten out of prison like I did after many years of anger and guilt and anger, waking up to a day where the prison bars, and you realize the prison bars never they were unlocked all the time. And you're free to walk through them. And that's what seeing what psychological innocence does. The prison bars fall away.
Wow. It's absolutely beautiful, Bill. Well, thank you so much for coming back on today, Bill.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored and grateful for the trust that you have to have me back. Right now, I'm kind of full for whatever reason. I guess it's because of the love that's in this virtual room that we have.
You can definitely feel it. It's amazing. That's why I love doing this. You know, every time we get together on here, you can feel that loving energy. So everybody's here for the same reason.
Absolutely.
We're all just trying to have a better experience of life.
Every single human being wants to live at peace, and they want to have love in their hearts. I've never met the person that didn't want that. I've met people that have lost hope that they could have it, but I never seen anybody that didn't want it. And it's a beautiful message to let people know that there is always hope because there is always help.
That is great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to Tony and Beth for the questions, and this has been an absolutely wonderful session here. So love you, Bill. Keep doing what you're doing.
Guys too. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
wasn't thinking of changing it.
We're going to unmute everybody so people can say thank you and goodbye and everything, and we'll wrap this up for this week.
Okay. Hi, Jason. Oh, hi, Jason.
Oh, Bill.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey,
Take
what?
care.
Bye. Patty, bye. Mark,
Thank
good to see you, Jackie.
Nice to
Bob.
meet you, Bill. Thanks.